empathy for the canine side of the pet therapy equation, that can make everybody safer. Young children are naturally focused on themselves. That's normal. But they can learn to pick up on the differences of different creatures. We adults can teach them how to listen by watching. In case we haven't met, I'm veterinarian Dr. Jeff Nickel, along with our family dog, Miss America. This is Tony over here, and Gaston is playing with some feathers on a stick toy with his mama. And it's keeping him out of trouble, which is actually important, because our cats don't always get along. By the way, if you can hear me loud and clear, please let me know by hitting the wow button. And if you find this information useful and you think it's helpful, please send me a heart and tag people. Any friends you have, family members who have dogs and children. We have cats hanging out with us because, well, they do. But this is about dogs and children, and in particular, it has to do with pet therapy dogs. We're hearing a lot more of that lately, and I'm talking specifically about dogs, many of whom are trained to work in hospitals and visit children or be adopted by families with children who have emotional or behavioral challenges. Autism, of course, is the big one that we hear a great deal about, but many children who have difficulty working with others can learn excellent skills from dogs, but it doesn't always go well. So let me explain that I know something about children and dogs. I'm trained in veterinary behavior medicine. I'm not a psychologist of people, but I'm a father, and these are my two sons. They're in their mid-20s right now. The one on the right side of that big fuzzy old English sheepdog, he had his 27th birthday yesterday, and the other guy, he's 25 and a half. And that's a wonderful old English sheepdog we had. Her name was Chase. I mean, she was wonderful. She loved those children, but when they were wild at that age, she did get nervous. And she had the good sense to sometimes give herself space from those kids. And of course, with my training and understanding of this kind of thing and my long experience with dogs, of course, in practice, we made it easy for her. And sometimes we put up a baby gate so that she could be on this other side and watch and enjoy those little boys without freaking out, because the well-being of the pet means a great deal, not only for the sake of the dog, or the cat for that matter, but because of what it can teach the children. Let me show you a picture of another dog. This is the wonderful Airedale I had back in the 80s. His name was Juan. I actually named him after a veterinary radiologist I admired a great deal. You notice that backpack behind him there? He and I did an enormous amount of hiking in the wilderness, back for several days. And he also was an obedience competition dog. We hiked all over the wilderness, and we campaigned all over the Southwest. In fact, one year, he was nationally ranked. He was a high-scoring competitor. We went to Arizona and all over New Mexico, and we went to Texas, and we went to Colorado. And he was the greatest friend I had. I was single at the time, and he meant the world to me. Well, not that this girlfriend doesn't, but he was different, because they're all different. And in fact, I credit Juan with teaching me a great deal about fatherhood. I had him before I met my wife and before our children were born, and I learned a great deal of patience from him. And it kind of set me on this path of what we humans can learn from members of another species. And one of the biggest reasons is that, yes, they have a great deal in common with us, but there are also differences. And when a person can recognize the species differences and the signaling and communications differences from a dog, for example, they can actually get better at recognizing differences that they see in other people. And we can start teaching our children that when they're youngsters. And they don't have to be emotionally challenged. Any child can learn that stuff, and they can be better adults and live a more peaceful life and set a great example for other people through their lives. And they can start when they're kids. So I'm going to tell you a story. This is not about a child, but it really is a great example. These are a couple of folks in their early 60s. I've known them for a while. Wonderful pet lovers and pet parents, and they had two Cocker Spaniels. And one of them was a cream puff, no problem at all, and they thought the other guy was too. And the woman in this family, they both loved their dogs, and she had this evening ritual And so did the dog. Dogs are big on routine and predictors. You know, one event predicts another. And so when these dogs noticed that their folks were getting ready to, turn in for the night, this particular dog, his name was Scotty, very cute little black and tan Cocker Spaniel. He would jump up on the foot of his pet parent's bed, and his mother would walk through the door. And on her way to the restroom to start getting ready for bed, she leaned over to kiss him on the forehead. Now, she explained that she'd done this a lot of times, but what I know was that she had not recognized, because she hadn't been trained in these things, she did not recognize the indicators that this dog was showing a fear response. And you think, oh, did they mistreat this dog? Believe me, they never did. I know these folks pretty darn well. It was an innate problem of this particular dog that when a much bigger creature, standing taller, approached and then leaned over, he was showing indicators of fear. And of course, I found that out by talking with him about it and asking very specific questions. But what brought them into my consulting room was this particular evening, she leaned over him to kiss him on the forehead, and he bit her on the face. Well, the face is close to the soul, and this was pretty upsetting. So she had a bite wound here, and of course went to the emergency right away, and they treated the wound and saw a plastic surgeon, and they've had a variety of procedures on this thing, and it's been a couple of years, and it's coming along very well. And I completely understand that they would invest heavily in this kind of thing. But one thing that I really respect them for is not giving up on Scotty. And they brought him into me, and I was able to understand the early indicators that he was showing, that again, they weren't knowledgeable, but they are now. And one of the most important things is not only the body language cues that Scotty was showing, that he was getting nervous when somebody big leaned over him, even though he loved her, even though he trusted her, and still does. It was an innate spike in panic, and that bite was defensive. And you think, that doesn't make any logical sense, does it? Well, it does not from a human perspective, but if you're a dog whose panic is easily triggered and you react, it's literally a split-second reaction. We have research using, you're upside down, girlfriend, high-resolution MRI scans to understand where these transmissions of neural impulses are coming from and going to among multiple neural centers in the brain that lead to responses, whether it's mental or behavioral responses. And these things happen in about a half second. So here's Scotty. He reacted. He wishes he hadn't done it. But you can't punish in the moment. That's not going to matter because it's an innate fear-based response. Fear, it's real, and it is not logical. So punishment, a reprimand, physical, none of that has any place in these things, despite how upsetting and frustrating and angry we can all get with that kind of thing. My goodness, frankly, and she, she's about 60, very nice, honestly, nice-looking woman, and so she looks fine now. Okay, so my point here is that they learned what not to do. And so what I explained to these folks was that they should never approach, reach for, lean over, or stare at this dog because he would respond defensively. And so what they do now, and they do just fine with him, they interact with him all they want to, all they ever have, but what they're doing now is they call him. And they lure him with food. And the food is important because it's a reinforcer and it's a resource. Never mind that these folks make a perfectly good income and that they're never going to run out of dog food. That is lost on the dogs. They're sure that there's going to be a famine starting in about 20 minutes, like pretty much all dogs, and that if they don't get everything they can right now, they might miss out and not make it till spring because, well, that's a big motivator in the wild. They don't want to miss anything. So these folks use food, they lure Scotty to them, and he comes, and when he comes by his choice, and they're sitting, in other words, they're lower and they appear smaller, then he is not afraid, and we don't get a fear response. Well, nothing is guaranteed, but this is a pretty sure bet with this dog. And another thing that's a sure bet is that if they inadvertently scare him again, his fear will spike. And if somebody's face is right in front of his, we could have another problem. So, let's take this a step further and talk specifically about therapy dogs. This is a journal that I subscribe to, and I read it every single month, cover to cover, the Journal of Veterinary Behavior. This is for residency-trained specialists in veterinary behavior medicine, people like me, although any veterinarian can get their hands on this journal. It's a whole lot of research papers, which isn't light reading, okay? But it's pretty valuable to people like me. And this particular paper was in last month's, and let me see if I can show you the title of it here. And it is, can you read that? I hope you can. Let me see. There we go. It's a systematic scoping review. What is the risk from child-dog interactions to dogs' quality of life? You know, we hear, again, a great deal about the benefits that dogs can provide children with some of these emotional and behavioral challenges. But this reviewed multiple different papers from the past that have been published on the behavioral effects, the stress-related effects on dogs in these therapy situations, and as, you know, family pets as well. Because, you know, we look at the benefits to the children, and I would never argue with that. You know, I'm a father. I'm real upfront about you know, the value of pets to children. But what happens to the pet? And we need to be cognizant of that. Again, not only because we love our pets and we want the best for them, and we don't want them stressed, and we don't want them reacting fearfully, and worst case biting. Okay, because a face bite to a woman is one thing, and a face bite to a child is another important problem. So let me just read you a couple of brief things from this paper. It is essential that we identify the specific risk factors, triggers, in interacting with children, which may have an immediate effect on a dog's well-being and general quality of life. Not only will this inform appropriate care practice from the dog's perspective, but it also will reduce the risk of harm to the child. And these things are associated with interacting with a stressed dog. In other words, the risk of bites. So, if we improve the quality of therapy through the promotion of mutually beneficial and positive environment. So, in other words, mutually beneficial, the pet and the child. And again, the way I look at this is, yeah, I want the pet to benefit as well as the child, but I also see this as an opportunity to teach children that they can bring out the best in themselves by interacting peacefully with the pet. And then everybody benefits. And that those children will end up being behaviorally healthier adults who are set a good example for others. I mean, let's face it, do we have a lot of conflict in our lives now? I mean, America's political divisions and issues overseas, and you know, let's face it. Let's try to be nice and teach our children to be as nice as we can. Miss America, honey, will you jump back up here? Thank you, darling. Very good. All right. So, you know, right out of the box, some children are not well suited for dogs. And it doesn't mean they shouldn't have them, but their parents and their teachers, if you're in that kind of a situation, need to be very clear on how to not only diminish risk, but bring out the best in everybody involved. So let's watch for body signals of the dogs. You know, we know a lot about listening to children and listening to their words and seeing indicators that they're getting frightened or stressed. Very important. Now let's look at the other side of that equation. What about the dog? So here are the symptoms. Nervous dogs often lick their lips. Now, by the way, I'm going to give you a list of symptoms of these, and if you're interested, send me a comment on Facebook. You can do it right now, or you can send it later, and I'll give you this list one more time. So they don't all do this, but these are the common signs. You could see one or many on this list. But lip licking, frequent yawning. If a dog is standing near its person and it's near children, whether the children are well known to the dog, or if you're visiting a hospital with a therapy dog and the dog lies down or gets behind its person, its leader, its owner, if you want to use that term. These are nervous dogs. Dogs with dilated pupils. Now, that can be hard to see sometimes, but if you look at your dog and you say, come back here, you silly girl, and you see the general size of the dog's pupil, then you can know that Gee, it looks blacker, meaning the pupil's bigger. Well, we've got adrenaline release and we have a scared dog. And dogs in that situation need distance from the arousal trigger, and that is the child. So that dog should be on a leash and be led away from the child. Give it a break. And if you think that, oh, this dog can get through this thing, no, they can actually become sensitized, meaning that they actually get more scared with each exposure and get more prone to worsen in their potential reactions down the road. So avoidance of arousal triggers, or if one comes up, derail it early by simply giving the dog a break. Do not reprimand, because if you give a response to a dog's behavior, whatever the behavior, the dog will believe that it earned the resource of the response from the leader. So if we don't like a behavior, we don't say anything. We, in fact, ignore it, but take that leash and create distance so the dog can go, "Phew, thanks." And when you notice calming, if you steal a quick glance of the dog you'd been ignoring as you led it away, and you notice a softer body posture, always reinforce that. Always say, very quietly, "Good dog." And you say it quietly because you want the dog to follow your emotional example. And in that situation, that type of context, you want the dog to be calm. So, very calmly reinforce. And we forget that. You know, we focus on behaviors we don't want, and we tend to reprimand them when in fact they should actually be ignored, and the dog should be led further from the arousal-related situation. But then steal a quick glance and say, "Softer body posture, good dog," so that the dog learns that this is what earns a response from my leader. Calming and being ratcheted up and getting nervous and anxious, that doesn't earn anything, but being calmer does. And you repeat that simple approach thousands of times. Okay. So what other kinds of indicators? Some dogs will show what's called a whale eye. They don't want to take their attention away from somebody who's scaring them, but they want to show the scary creature, in this case a child maybe, that they don't really want to confront. And they want to show that, look, I'm not a threat. So they'll signal to the other dog or the child by turning their face away that, okay, I don't want to have any kind of a headbutting contest with you, but at the same time they're nervous, so they don't take their eyes off the child or off the person who's scaring them. And so you get this thing, if you look at my eye, you can see the white part of my eye. It has sort of a crescent moon shape because I'm turning my face away, but I haven't taken my eyes off you, okay? Well, that's called a whale eye. And when you see that kind of thing, you've got a scared dog. Again, you don't say a word, create distance. And you have that dog on a leash, all you got to do is walk away, okay? And I wouldn't go back right away. In fact, maybe not at all, not for a while. Put the dog outside. Put up a baby gate so that the dog can be near you and the family, but not near the children. That dog needs a break, okay? Growling is another important thing, and you say, well, that's pretty obvious. But many people mistakenly equate growling with aggression. Growling is not aggression. Growling is a verbal communication from a dog, and here's where the dog is at that moment. The dog is saying to itself, gee, I've been sending body language signals to this scary creature, maybe this wild child, and they've been disregarded. Well, of course they have, because children aren't trained in recognizing canine body signals. Their parents aren't either. And so the dog says, well, I would show this same body language communication to another dog who is scaring me. Well, these people aren't getting it. So they ratchet up their communication and they go verbal, which, you know, dogs don't do very often because they communicate almost entirely by body language signals. Well, if they have to, they growl and they go verbal. Well, that upsets a lot of people. And I get that because they know that a bite could follow, and it certainly could. And so they reprimand that. And they say, you stop that. Or they might even punish physically. And they think that that makes sense. Well, it actually doesn't. Because in nearly all cases, nothing's 100%, but in nearly all cases, it is an indicator of fear, and that the dog's fear is ratcheting up, and the dog's saying, look, I can't get further away because I'm indoors. If I were outside, I'd head for the hills, but I'm inside, I'm feeling kind of trapped. And the only way that the dog can think of to get distance from who is ever scaring him is to growl, and that person may get further away. So you give that dog a break. Once again, you don't say a word, you take the leash and you create distance. And in fact, the other problem with reprimanding or punishing a growl is that if you were to do that immediately following every single time a dog growled, and you were consistent in your punishment, and it was a strong enough punishment, you could actually succeed in diminishing that dog growling to the point where you can teach some dogs to never growl. And you think, well, that's a good thing. No, the dog's emotional state hasn't changed in those situations, but it has learned, because it's been punished, to stop growling. And now you have a dog who never gives a warning anymore. They can just ratchet up and bite. Well, that hasn't helped anybody. And besides that, if a dog is growling because it's afraid, and you're looking at the behavioral motivation, which is essential, what is the cause of the problem? Well, we don't punish fear, because we don't improve fear by punishing it, do we? Punishment has very little place in behavior modification, if any at all, and it's not something that we apply to fear. So we simply ignore and create a distance. So here's a fundamental, and I'd love it if everybody watching this could commit this to memory and send this to your friends, is that unless you really have a dog with a long-standing, trusting relationship, and you know very clearly from its body signaling and its history that you have no risk of triggering a fear response, then nobody should ever reach for, lean over, approach, or stare at a dog, because those can very easily be perceived as threats. And we can't bring out the best in anybody by triggering a threat, even though we don't mean to. And that's an important thing for our children to learn, is that when they interact with people throughout their lives, other children, or when they get into the adult world, they're going to run into a lot of people who are different than they are. In fact, let's face it, there are no two of us who are alike, right? And so if we have interactions with other people, the first thing for us to do, and the same is true with pets, cats or dogs, is watch and listen with our eyes, and watch for those body signals. Look for the yawning and the lip licking and the lying down and the trying to get behind a leader, the pupils that might be dilated, that whale eye. Look for those indicators. And if we pick that up, if the child learns to listen by watching, they can apply that skill to other people, other children. And again, if you've got a child who has emotional challenges, well, that's something that they can learn. It does not come naturally to them. And they've got a bigger problem with relationships with other people in some cases than a child who doesn't have those issues. But we can use pets, and pets can be great teachers. This guy right here, he taught me a whole lot about fatherhood because he forgave my mistakes. And as a much younger man, I made mistakes. Well, I still do. They're just different. Maybe not as bad as they once were. But I sure learned patience from him, and I learned forgiveness. And I applied those skills to my children. And you know what? They've turned out real well. And I don't take much credit for that. My wife and I pretty much stayed out of their way and provided some guidance and a good example. But pets, they can be wonderful teachers. But we adults need to be the people who teach the children how to take those lessons and how to apply that. And we can do that ongoing. But one of the big takeaways I would love to see more people do with their kids is by watching that dog and showing the child, you know what, here are the indicators that this little guy is nervous. We're going to give him a break. We're not going to push the issue. We're going to take him and put him some other place out in the yard, or put her behind a baby gate so that she can be with us but not feel nervous and threatened. And children can say, all right, I can learn that. And children, I'll tell you what they love about pets is that they never leave, they always forgive, and there's always another day. And I'll tell you what, a lot of humans aren't very good at that stuff, but cats and dogs are pretty good at it, and they can learn that too. So I hope this is helpful to you. And if you have any other questions later, you're always welcome to put them on my Facebook page. And it doesn't have to be about pet therapy dogs and the benefits or the risks to the well-being of dogs, not to mention the kids, but anything pet-related, including physical issues. I spent many, many years in general veterinary practice, and I still keep up on those things with continuing education. So any questions at all, you're very welcome to send them. And about cats, too. I write a weekly column in the Albuquerque Journal, a question-answer column, and get a lot of behavior questions. But the things I don't get enough questions on is questions on physical concerns with cats. So if you have a cat and a physical problem or physical symptoms, I would love those questions because I need more of them to answer, because so many people don't ask questions about their cats, and they really need to. Cats are assumed to be so self-sufficient that you don't need to do much for them, and cats are just good at hiding that stuff. So I hope you find this information helpful. Every week I produce a Facebook Live and write a weekly blog that shows up in the Albuquerque Journal, and then I post it here on Facebook. And my intention is to bring out the best in pets and their people. And by the way, you can get all this stuff every week, my Facebook Live and my media blog, just by subscribing to my website, drjeffnichol.com, drjeffnichol.com. No cost to subscribe, and every Tuesday morning in your email box, in your inbox, you'll get my media blog and my Facebook Live. Costs nothing, and when you do subscribe, I will send you my free at-home pet first aid and CPR guide. So thank you for tuning in. Miss America says, have a nice weekend. And here's Tony. I don't know if you can see him. He's sitting up on a textbook. I think it's a pharmacology text. And Gaston's still on the floor playing with a feathers on a stick toy. So thanks again, and don't hesitate to let me know if you need anything. I'm Dr. Jeff Nichol.